attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar, Getting Your Business Ready for Storm Season. My name's Matt Johnston, I'm the Communications Manager at CCIQ and I'll be your facilitator this afternoon. The series of webinars for Get Ready Week, today and tomorrow, form part of Get Ready Queensland, which is about building our resilience to deal with the extreme weather and natural disasters that are a part of living in our state. Resilience is about more than just good preparation or effective responding. It involves adopting a mindset that accepts extreme weather as a part of living in Queensland and preparing to handle it accordingly. Getting your business ready for storm season and tomorrow's Strengthen Your Business webinars will assist you to prepare and build resilience in your business to deal with extreme weather and natural disaster events. Just as a bit of a guide today, you'll see a hand up on the left-hand side of the button there. If you can push that when you're going to ask a question, type your question in. That will let us answer any of those questions when we come to the end of the Q&A session at the end of today's webinar. We'll also ask you to please send through your questions as we go along as opposed to waiting until right at the end. That way we can get a steady stream of them and answer them once we get to that point. The webinar will run for about an hour. You should also have a workbook which supports this webinar topic. And if you do not have a copy, please fire through a question and let us know and we can send you the link. As mentioned, there will also be a Q&A session, so please feel free to ask those questions and our presenter Paul will address them right at the end. Welcome today, Paul. Now, Paul is a web content editor in the Department of Tourism, Major Events, Small Business and the Commonwealth Games. He crafts business-focused content and solutions for the Business and Industry portal, and he's delivered a number of webinars on various topics. Let's get started, Paul, on today's webinar, Getting Your Business Ready for Storm Season.
Thanks, Matt. During recent summers, much of Queensland has been affected by severe flood and weather events, and thousands of businesses were affected directly or indirectly, and many were not well prepared for these events and were slow or unable to recover. Now, this situation prompted the Queensland Government to invest heavily in programs such as the one you're participating in today to improve resilience in this state's businesses. And today we'll be looking at determining the risks to your business, developing a practical plan for how your business can plan for and recover from a storm, flood or cyclone, and practicing that plan. Now, there are many resources available to help you, and the Queensland Government's Business and Industry portal contains a range of useful information and tools to assist you with managing risks and developing your disaster plan or a business continuity plan. And look, that website is www.business.qld.gov.au. Now, the business continuity planning process is based on the comprehensive approach to emergency or disaster management, which involves 4 key steps. And these are prevention, preparedness, response, and recovery. Now, prevention is the actions taken to reduce or eliminate the likelihood or effects of an incident, and this element is largely covered by what we call risk management planning. Preparedness is actions taken prior to an incident to ensure an effective response and recovery, and it's largely covered by what we call a business impact analysis. Response is the actions taken to respond to an incident in terms of containment, control, and minimising impacts, and it's largely covered by incident response planning. Recovery is actions taken to recover from an incident, of course, in order to minimise disruption and recovery times, and it's largely covered by what we call recovery planning. Now, the PPRR model anticipates crises, and it uses sequential planning and implementation of actions before, during, and after an event. Now, business continuity planning is a process used to develop a practical plan for how your business can plan for and recover or partially restore critical business activities, and this happens within a predetermined time frame after a storm, flood or cyclone. And the resulting plan we call a business continuity plan. As part of the whole process of developing this business continuity plan, you should include what we call rehearse, maintain and review components to make sure your plan meets the needs of your business over time. So, prevention is about managing the risks of a storm, flooding or any natural disaster that can impact on your business. And we break down evaluating risks into 5 simple steps. Step 1, identify risks that could impact on your business. Step 2, analyse risks to assess their impacts. Step 3, evaluate risks to prioritise their management. Step 4, treat risks to minimise their impact. And step 5, which is to develop and review your risk management plan. We'll examine each of these steps in more detail in the following slides.
Paul, if I can just interrupt, we know there's been a fair few reports out lately that we can expect some cyclones over the coming summer. Queensland summers always tend to present at least a few storms, and in recent years probably a little bit worse. At what stage should a business start making these plans, taking measures to look at risks and whatnot? Is it something they start now? Should it already have been done?
Look, very much so. The time to start is now. And if you already have a plan, you should be reviewing it, making sure it's up to date. But if you don't have one, it's really important to have it in place, because this is all about people knowing what they need to do in the event of a crisis. People need to know beforehand. You need to conduct training. If you're an owner-operator, you need to have thought about all of those contingency plans you need to make in the event that you hear about a crisis coming your way. So it's very much about forward planning. You can't do it at the time of the crisis. Yeah. So, I mean, every business faces risks, and so what we ask you to do is just think for a moment about the hundreds of things that most business owners worry about. So while a few are predictable, others are not, and you can, however, plan and control risks to a certain extent. And some of these could be changing salary costs, taxes, overhead expenses, equipment and supply costs. But others, such as cyclones and other natural disasters, they're unpredictable. They're largely beyond your control. And as Queenslanders, we know these events can and do happen to businesses all the time. And they can directly affect your day-to-day operations or impact on profits, and it can result in financial losses that may be serious enough to cripple the business or even bankrupt it. So consider the various risks to your business from storms or flooding. How might they affect your products and services, your facilities, supply chain, your suppliers, or your customers, employees, and even contractors? If you run a retail business, for example, during a flood, some of the risks you face could be a loss of stock and equipment due to rising floodwaters. So once you've identified the possible risks to your business, you need to assess the impact of those risks. You want to separate minor acceptable risks from major risks which must be managed immediately. And this involves deciding on the relationships between the likelihood and the consequences. There are a number of tools available to undertake this task, including the matrix that you see on the screen now. Now, once you've undertaken this task, you'll be able to evaluate and prioritise those risks which are most likely to have the most impact on your business, so you can determine whether they're acceptable or require treatment. You may decide that some risks are acceptable, but some will require treatment in order to either reduce or eliminate negative consequences, or to reduce the likelihood of an adverse incident. The next step is to plan their management.
Paul, just how specific are we talking on these risks? Are they broad scope? I mean, there's some obvious ones in terms of weather events, but are we breaking it right down? I imagine retailers would have issues such as phones and FPOS and things like that. Are they all covered off in one of these plans?
Very much so, because it comes down to specifics, looking at what things could happen that will have a major impact on your business. So, for example, you mentioned FPOS, and FPOS going down could happen, and very much in retail that could stop you doing business if you don't have a contingency plan. And if people remember the old swiping machines for credit cards, for instance. People might look at them in drawers and think, oh, what have I got this here for? This has been superseded, but that's a good example of something that can be used to eliminate the risk. So you need to start at the broad level, and then you need to drill down to those specific things that could have an impact on your business. And look, once you've analysed the risks to your business, in terms of their likelihood and impact, the next step involves considering your options in terms of mitigating and treating these risks. So risks might be treated in a number of ways. You can avoid the risk, so you can decide to discontinue activities or processes that give rise to the risk. For example, a food retailer might decide to remove an item from their menu if they identify the ingredients have a very short shelf life and they're concerned about food poisoning. You can reduce or mitigate a risk, so you could do this by taking measures to reduce the likelihood or impact of the risk. For example, you can provide training in the use of dangerous equipment. You can share the risk by transferring or sharing a portion of the risk to reduce it. The obvious example here is purchasing insurance. And your other option is to retain or accept the risk by deciding to take no action due to the cost-benefit analysis that you conduct. Now, going back to our flood example, to reduce the risk of losing stock and equipment in the event of a flood, you might decide to find a place on higher ground where you can store items from your business off-site. And you might also decide to seal the doors and windows with heavy plastic and sandbags to prevent water getting into the store. Now, insurance is one method of sharing risk. You pay an insurance premium, and rather than run the risk of not being protected against the possibility of a much larger loss. But aside from insurance, businesses can also treat risks through developing contingency or backup plans, through quality control processes, staff training, properly maintaining facilities, plant and equipment. You can use security devices, establish evacuation plans, and another example is undertaking regular drills and tests. Now, sometimes it's not possible or cost-effective to implement all treatment strategies. For example, you may not be able to afford to purchase flood insurance if you live in a flood-prone area because the cost of insurance is greater than potential financial loss. In that case, it may be more cost-effective to source an off-site storage facility for your stock. Also, it's probably worth mentioning here about cloud computing solutions as a risk treatment strategy. In the simplest terms, cloud computing means storing and accessing data and programs over the internet instead of on your computer's hard drive. So cloud is just a metaphor for the internet, and one of the core benefits of moving to a cloud environment is the ability you have to have your data secured in a 99% safe environment with numerous levels of redundancy, security and backup.
And Paul, I guess in that sense it probably means if you're operating in a cloud you can really operate some of the functions of your business from anywhere.
Exactly. I mean, it's a great backup, and it protects you from your damage to your premises in the event of this happening. I mean, and it means, as you said, you can relocate some of your activities. It depends on the nature of your business. Some people will be able to do all of their business off-site, and for others it might just protect certain elements of their business. For example, critical business functions and also record keeping and things as simple as that. Yeah. And it's important to mention that risk management is not something you only do once. You need to constantly monitor and review your strategies. So every small business should ensure their risk management plan is reviewed at least on an annual basis. You undoubtedly find over time that new risks are created, that existing risks are increased or decreased. Some risks may no longer exist, and the priority of risks may change. So existing risk treatment strategies are no longer effective. Now, an example is that if sewage and drainage outlets were reviewed in your local area, it could also minimise the risk and the effect of a flood, so this may change your plans. So what does preparedness involve? It means taking action prior to an incident occurring to ensure an effective response and recovery. It could mean being proactive and planning for the likelihood of an event that has the capacity to interrupt your business operations. It means a personal commitment to dispel any thoughts that it won't happen to me. And it means rehearsing and conducting drills or exercises. So take the time to identify the operations most critical to the success of your business on a day-to-day basis, and determine how long you can go without each of these activities not being available. What will the impact of the loss or interruption to these operations be on your business? So spend your time establishing exactly how it will affect your business and what you need to do to manage the situation. Identify the immediate impacts and the subsequent consequences and get ahead of them if you can. A business impact analysis largely captures the preparedness aspects of PPRR. And every business has numerous activities in its overall operations, but only a percentage will be key to its survival. The purpose of a business impact analysis is to gather information to determine basic recovery requirements for your business in the event of a crisis. It will show which parts of your business will be most affected by an incident and what effect it will have upon the business as a whole. In other words, a BIA is used to establish your critical business activities, the resources required to support each activity, the impact of stopping these activities. I would recommend assigning a recovery time objective, or an RTO, to each activity, and you'll see that on the screen. The RTO is the time at which an activity must be back in operation before it will impact negatively on your business. Once you've established an RTO for each activity, you can prioritise each activity, starting with the most urgent. The incident response phase starts when the incident happens and it continues immediately after. It covers actions taken to respond to an incident in terms of containment, limiting loss to life and property, and preventing incident escalation. Incident response management is a plan of action implemented quickly when such a disaster occurs. So your incident response plan should be simple without being simplistic. Although you'll never be able to plan your response in detail for every possible event, you need to remember that people need to be able to react quickly in an emergency, so they can't stop to read lots of detail. This will make it more difficult. When a crisis such as a cyclone, a storm or a flood hits, you never have the luxury of time to respond. So before it happens, you need to put together an incident response team, which may include a team leader, response team, assessors, spokesperson or others as needed.
And Paul, I guess when you talk about that team that you've got there, is it restricted to just those people? I mean, is it a whole of staff thing? I would assume that if an event were to occur, you would want as many hands on deck as possible.
Look, it really is about people being clear what their role is. So, if they are in a position of leadership, they need to know that. If they're going to be assessing things, if they're going to be available as people on the ground to do what's needed based on the crisis, it's just important that they've gone through those drills and that training so they understand what their role is. And documenting it makes this clear in the event. So you can imagine if it's important you respond quickly, you don't have time to hold meetings to clarify with people what their role is. You want them to just hit the ground running. So yeah, it's a good point you make there. Yeah.
And I guess it probably then adds to the importance of keeping those channels of communication open so that once you sort of had the initial impact of it, or even while it's happening, you want to be getting in contact with these people, don't you?
Exactly, and I mean that's what's so important. We've listed here a team leader, so everyone knows who's in charge, and there's a spokesperson as well. So that's a good example of someone that the media would need to speak to, and people can direct them that way. So you don't have sort of an unplanned communication going out about what's happening to the business. People will have different levels of awareness of what the whole picture is. So it's important to plan this ahead of time. Yeah,
right.
And look, this moves quite well into us talking about the incident response plan. And this plan should include clear, direct instructions for the crucial first hour after the crisis hits. It will involve a list of personnel who have the authority to invoke the plan, so those who can say we're now implementing this plan and under what circumstances this should occur. And also it needs to be clear who can invoke the evacuation plan, who's responsible for that. It should include a list of response team members and their backups, as well as a detailed explanation of their roles and functions in response to a crisis. It's a good idea to have checklists people can easily follow. You need an evacuation plan, a go pack, which refers to an emergency kit, which contains critical documents and equipment, which can be picked up quickly and easily carried off site. It would be great if it had contact lists for both internal and external personnel, just to ease planning and communication, and an event log to record information, decisions and actions in the period immediately following the critical event or incident. The first hour after any crisis is vital. So if a critically injured person is treated within 1 hour, their chances of survival increase significantly. And pretty much the same applies to crisis management. If your crisis response is quick, your chance for business survival increases. So you need to keep on top of the crisis and communicate changes in the situation as quickly as you can. There's often no way to tell how long your particular crisis will last, so you need to regularly assess the momentum of the situation. Ask yourself, what's the worst thing that can happen to your business? How will you deal with it? If there's even a slight chance it could happen, assume it will happen and develop strategies to deal with it. Social media can play an important role in crisis communication and emergency management. Look, the Queensland Police Service Media Unit Twitter account played a leading role disseminating timely and relevant information to the public during crisis situations in Queensland.
And can that work in the reverse as well, Paul, where you say that the QPS media unit was proactive on Twitter? How can a business then use their own social media in this situation?
Look, it's a great way for a business to communicate with customers and also the community, because people will be concerned about how a business is going. You saw in the last floods that we had many volunteers going to help. Well, sometimes that would be helpful, and other times it would be better to say, look, we've all got it in hand. Thanks for your help. Thanks for your offers. If you don't want to have to manage volunteers as well if you already have it under control. There's also that element of recovery too, where people might think that businesses are still shut. And you're wanting that business to come back to you, so you might want to communicate that way and say, we're back in action, please come down, and we're ready for business. So it's it's a good way to get the message out. Yeah. And look, I mean, we're about to talk about recovery too, and it plays a good role and can play a strong role in recovery for businesses. And look, recovery can be broadly divided into resumption, continuity of business activities, and also restoration or recovery of resources. So while incident response is concerned with events as they unfold during a crisis or emergency, recovery plans a proactive approach to get the business back on its feet in the shortest possible time after such an event. And once the incident's over, there are a number of steps you need to take. So the first one is to assess the extent of the damage caused during the crisis. It's a good idea during this stage to record injuries to any people, including staff, clients or other members of the public, any damage to buildings, equipment, company vehicles and stock, which is important for insurance, any impacts on your business function, and also any damage you feel has been made to your reputation. The second component is to conduct a critical incident debrief. So within 48 hours, preferably sooner, within 24 hours following a critical incident, it's a good idea to hold a meeting to debrief employees. And the purpose of this critical incident debriefing is to help employees understand some of the reactions they might be having by encouraging them to gain support from each other and by allowing them the opportunity to verbalize their thoughts and feelings. A third component is to keep staff informed throughout the recovery process, because they may have concerns about colleagues who have been injured or what's expected of them, even whether they should turn up for work the next day. And the other concern they might have is whether they still have a job. So continue to communicate with all key stakeholders. Each crisis provides an opportunity for learning and plans to be revised. So you need to ensure that you have a record of what's learned so you can implement it, and ask questions like what went well and what didn't, what key lessons were learned, what changes do we need to make to our business processes.
I can see in the poll we've got a few questions coming through. If anyone else has any, please fire them through. Obviously, if they're very specific to your case, it might be difficult to answer them now on air, but we certainly will take a list of all questions and we can email out responses if you do require them at any stage, or if you want a bit more in-depth information on your own particular situation. I guess people, given what we've been through the last few years, people might actually be listening who have had their own issues that they would like to deal with better next time, or just in anticipation of anything happening.
Yeah, definitely. We're really open to any questions, so please send them through. If we can't answer them today, we're happy to respond to them afterwards as well. So you can always make contact one way or another to ask for a response now or later. And look, the important things to remember are that when disaster strikes the business, the situation's changed, and where there's changed, it's also a good time to focus on opportunity. So experience shows us that while most businesses eventually recover after a crisis, there are some that recover faster and even grow. And prudent response and recovery planning should include prompts to review changes in the market and any opportunities that might stem from them. So you might want to consider how the market's changed, if there's unmet demand or a new market you can service, whether you need to support existing customers, or if there's an opportunity to build brand or reputation through community service or support, and also consider how your competitors are affected. Remember, your business continuity plan is a working document, and it's a good idea to think of it that way. It requires constant reappraisal and revision, as flaws and omissions in the plan will always be revealed during exercises. And businesses who are serious about crisis management review their plans to see what they can learn from them. They use the past to improve the future. So reflecting on what you've done and how you've done it helps to manage the next incident better. Testing your plan is an important aspect of business continuity planning. Your plan cannot be considered reliable until it has been tested and proved to be workable. Now, testing might involve validating plans, rehearsing key roles and responsibilities, and testing your systems. I've got a good case study that I'd like to talk about, because it's a good example of a business that engaged in business continuity planning. Even though they wouldn't necessarily call it a business continuity plan, they use it as a working document, and they continue to review it. So a good example is the Rosalie Gourmet Market, which is a thriving boutique food hall that's been operating since 1997. And in October 2010, the Bureau of Meteorology advised there was likely to be a wetter than average summer. Now, Rosalie had been inundated in the 1974 floods, and even though he was assured it would not happen again, the owner decided to develop a practical plan for how his business could recover within the shortest possible time frame if there was a flood. So he began by identifying the risks to his business that would affect his ability to continue to operate and profit. He identified that the risks to his business from flooding included a loss of income due to reduced sales, a loss of stock, and a loss of equipment. With regards to his stock, he grouped it into 4 categories. 1, goods that were not heat sensitive, for example cans, goods that were not refrigerated but were heat sensitive, for example chocolate, refrigerated goods, for example meat and cheeses, and frozen goods, for example pastry sheets. And to mitigate these risks, he purchased flood insurance through a broker. He realised that if a flood were to occur, he'd need to move all of his stock from the shop and store it off-site. He took into consideration it would most likely be raining, and therefore he'd need to carefully consider how he could move his stock without getting it wet. And he decided that it would be best to carry it in bread trays and milk crates covered with large black plastic bags. He also identified the equipment that could be moved off-site. To protect the store itself, he determined that he would need to seal the doors and windows with black plastic and sandbag over the top. He realised that he would also need a generator, tools and timber to help rebuild in the event that water did get into the store. Now, as a result, he took the following actions. He started collecting and storing bread trays, milk crates and plastic bags. He identified alternative sites to store his unrefrigerated, refrigerated and frozen goods, and he identified an alternate site to store his equipment. So, on Monday the 10th of January 2011, the Bureau of Meteorology warned of the possibility of heavy rain causing flooding in the Brisbane area. So he took immediate action. The top 5 things he did immediately were: he obtained as much reliable information on the flooding so he could make informed decisions. He reviewed and invoked his plan. He assessed his cash reserves and determined the cash needs of the business. He removed his stock and equipment to previously identified locations, and he protected the store with plastic and sandbags. Although some of his larger equipment was portable, he made a conscious decision not to remove the large items such as display cabinets from his store due to the limited time he had available to him. And after the flood, water receded within days, and as soon as he was able to gain access to his shop, he returned to assess the damage. Unfortunately, as a result of people using boats in the flooded street outside his shop, a log was washed into his front window and broke the glass, and water flooded in. There was extensive damage to his cabinetry and fit-out. He identified that there were immediate recovery activities he needed to do. He needed to acquire the previously identified generator, so it was ready to be accessed, as they were without power. He was able to partner his available staff with skilled volunteers to refit the store as soon as possible, and he was able to access tools and wood that had previously been sourced. And then on 22nd of January 2011, only 12 days after the floods, Rosalie Gourmet Market became the first business in Rosalie to open its doors again. And as a result of his experience, he's now identified the following changes to his plan: that to avoid debris breaking down his windows, he would use 12mm marine-grade ply on the glass areas before the plastic and sandbags. So he learnt lessons that could also be incorporated back into his business. Planning was essential as it gave him a framework to keep his business going should another crisis occur, and he needed to continue to set goals and have a continuity plan for his business at all times, and not just when a crisis exists. He also saw the need to test and review his plan on a regular basis to make sure it continued to meet the needs of his business.
Paul, I guess that is a really good example, because during that 2010 period, the images from Rosalie were probably some of the more difficult ones to watch. I guess it's an area that quite a few people are familiar with, and the scenes were sort of duplicated around the state, but to actually see how efficient Rosalie Gourmet Market was in going within 12 days to be back up and operational, that's just a phenomenal achievement, and probably shows how well these plans work, doesn't it?
Well, that's right. It's impressive in the level of detail, and that he had all those contingency plans and setups in place. You know, if he hadn't had things like a place to store his food, refrigerated and otherwise, if he hadn't had, all of the plans in place to protect the shop windows and move critical equipment, then it might have been a very different situation. And so he being back in action so quickly, it would have saved a lot of money, would have given the staff confidence as well. They knew there was a plan in place to get it back up and running. It is a great achievement. And we can all learn from that kind of experience and how detailed he had to be to make sure that he protected his business. Yeah.
But there's certainly some other businesses in the area when it took them up to a year, even some that didn't bounce back after some of the floods that we had. So I guess having this plan and in future events probably set a bit of a precedent in the area of just how well Rosalie Gourmet Market coped.
Well, that's right. I mean, people put a lot of time and energy into their businesses, and so, this is an example of something that can come along and really, it can cause a lot of grief for people if they haven't planned in this way. And so this is a good example of someone who didn't leave it to chance, and this is why it's so important to plan ahead and have it in place already so you're ready to go. Yeah. And, I mean, to summarise, effective business continuity planning, it's one of the most important considerations for any business. So having processes and resources in place to monitor and manage these plans is essential if you're to survive turbulent times and to deliver sustainable profitability. Today's webinar, we've tried to give you a fundamental understanding of business continuity planning and why it's so vital for your business. And you now have information and the tools to participate in developing and implementing business continuity plans for your business. There are a number of online resources where you can find some further information, and the Queensland Government's Business and Industry Portal contains a range of useful information, tools and templates to assist you with risk management and business continuity planning.
Thank you very much for that, Paul. That brings an end to the presentation itself. We do have a poll question that's just popped up on your screen. That will pop up and you'll be able to answer it, and we'll collate those results and get back to you on it. Based on today's webinar, if you haven't already got a plan, will you develop a business continuity plan following the information you've received from Paul? If you answer that one, as I said, we'll get back to you with the results and show you. But if we can just have a brief chat now, Paul, we did see what had been done at Rosalie Gourmet Market, and we've seen in the past businesses that have put these plans in place. Are they able to be shared? Is it something that we've spoken about here today? Yes, but specific regions probably have specific needs, and I guess it probably does help to talk to your next door or your neighbouring business.
Oh, look, it's a very good idea. If you're new to business in an area and you haven't thought about what might happen during the storm season, it's probably worth talking to your neighbouring businesses and what they've seen in the past, and also what kind of plans they've put in place and how did they access, for example, volunteers. The local council is probably another good source of information about what you should be thinking about locally. Situations and risks are different in any given place, and they have historical information about what might have happened and what you might expect in the future. So, yeah, it's a very good idea to talk to people on the ground, and you can ask them to share their plans too. They might be more than willing to show you what they've got in place and their processes, that kind of thing. Yeah.
I guess that's an important point for the council too. I mean, they have things like sandbagging and whatnot. People aren't on their own in these situations, and I know from my previous experiences with these things that certainly knowing where you can go and get sandbags and being prepared is a very important thing to know.
Exactly. Again, it's that whole thing of that, critical incident timing. So if you can respond quickly and you know where things are and local resources are, then it sort of saves you a lot of time and effort at a time when communication might be more difficult too.
Great. Well, just got the results from the poll coming through. 88% of people watching the webinar today have said that yes, they will be implementing a plan or taking some measures to do that. There's 13% undecided. I'm not sure if those people even already have a plan in place, which just might need reviewing. But that's certainly a great response. And
that is a great response. So, yeah, definitely. I mean, I encourage you, if you are undecided today, to think about it some more. Perhaps, go to the website, business.qld.gov.au, and look up some more on business continuity planning, just to break it down for yourself and make it simple to get started. But, yeah, that's a great result. Good to see.
Okay. We've got a question from Susan, and I wonder whether you might have just briefly touched on it. Where can I find a copy of the BCP template? So obviously now that we've got 88% of people listening who would like to start one of these plans, where can they go and find a bit of a framework to build theirs on?
Sure. Look, I mean, the best place, I've mentioned the website before. If you go to business.qld.gov.au, there's a big search box right in the middle of the screen. And if you type in business continuity plan and search for it, there'll be a guide there, and there's also a template in that guide, so it shouldn't be too hard for you to find. And I mean, that's just a good sort of basis to get started. If you need to adapt and customize it, that's a good idea, because every business has different needs just make sure that it's got as much detail as you need to respond. Yeah.
Okay, and Greg's got a question that I'm sure quite a few people out there were wondering about. Are there any good sources of information for assessing risk? We've obviously talked a lot about the risks, but is there a way that they can look through and actually work through these things in their own time?
Yeah, look, I mean, we're going to send information out to you about this kind of thing, but also on the Business and Industry portal, there are extensive guides on this kind of thing and checklists, that kind of thing, so you can work through how to get started and think about these kinds of things. Because sometimes, it is a case of where do I get started and what kind of thing are we talking about. So, yeah, have a read and that's a good place to get started.
Okay, and Vicky is asking, does this type of planning apply to all disaster events? We've spoken specifically, obviously, about storm season, but, I mean, even for my own curiosity, is it as simple as a car hitting a power pole down the street? Is that the sort of event people need these things for?
Yeah, definitely. It's about anything that can impact on your business's, profits and sustainability. So, this is used by emergency management organisations across the country. Not just about the storms, but it's down to anything that can compromise your business because there's issues like cash flow and other things that can have a negative impact. So it's worth thinking about what could happen, what you do right away. The quicker you respond, the better. So it applies to any situation like that.
Okay, and finally, Jim's question. He's an owner-operator, so obviously a sole trader, doesn't have any employees. Does he need to be doing this sort of planning in his own business as well?
Look, yes, definitely, because I mean, obviously, as an owner-operator, if it's all down to you, the success of your business, then you need to think about situations like, what if you become unwell or are injured? What if it depends on your line of work, but what if you can't access your work site? What would you do in the meantime to make sure that you don't lose business? I mean, we were talking a bit earlier. I don't know what Jim's line of business is, but we were talking earlier about the example of, for example, a hairdressing salon. If your premises is taken out, how do you do your business? And so if you have plans in place, maybe you can't take everything with you. You're going to lose a certain amount of equipment, but you may be able to grab the essential equipment. What can you do? You could do your business in people's homes. You could rent a space in another salon that hasn't been affected, to continue your business. Pre-planning will allow you to not leave it to chance and then wonder what you're going to do next. So,
I guess I know a lot of the research we do with CCIQ shows that people who are sole traders or even small business owners with up to 5 staff, they generally do a lot of the work within the business themselves. So they don't have big HR teams or big finance teams, and they have a really intimate knowledge of the workings of their business. So I guess they probably at an advantage, aren't they, when they do formulate one of these plans, that they know exactly what needs to be done.
Well, it's a very good example because, if it's all in your head and something happens to you, then nobody else knows how to carry out the plan, or if they have authority to do this. If everyone's looking to you as the owner, and you haven't written it down anywhere, there's no contingency, no backup. Whereas if it's very clear and you've trained your staff in it and they know what to do, then you're protecting your investment in the business, and they'll appreciate it because you're protecting their source of employment too. So yeah, it's critical that owner operators are involved in this kind of planning.
All right, wonderful. That's all the questions that we've got time for there, Paul. We do need your feedback from people out there listening, so there will be an email survey sent out to you shortly. If you could please respond to that and let us know. We obviously value your feedback, and as Paul mentioned, we'll be sending out the slides from today's webinar and a recording. So even if you go through those and you do have some specific questions that you might like answered or something more to elaborate on, please let us know and we'll get the guys to respond to that query. Don't forget, we've got another webinar coming up tomorrow about strengthening your business. You can register for that one at www.cciq.com.au/events, and that goes for any events that we have coming up at CCIQ, or any further information you would like. Take a look at that events page and see if there's something that takes your fancy. Paul, thank you. You will be joining us again tomorrow, and we look forward to talking to you then.
Thanks very much. It's been a pleasure.